Imagine abandoning everything you've ever known, your job, your home, your comfortable life, to chase a rumor of gold at the edge of the world. Picture yourself among nearly 100,000 souls who heard whispers of nuggets the size of chicken eggs lying in frozen creek beds, just waiting to be plucked from the earth like golden fruit. This is the story of the last great adventure of the 19th century, when ordinary people became extraordinary, when the impossible seemed within reach, and when a single word, gold, shouted from the docks of Seattle, triggered the most epic migration in human history. Close your eyes and let yourself drift back to that electric summer of 1896, when Queen Victoria ruled an empire. The Wright brothers were still earthbound dreamers, and deep in the untamed wilderness of Canada's Yukon territory, three men were about to spark a fever that would consume the world. The Klondike River winds its way through valleys that have known only the footsteps of the Adirondack Wet'suwet'en First Nations people for countless generations. They called this place Adirondack, meaning hammer water, named for the way they drove fish traps into the riverbed. For centuries, this land had provided sustenance, shelter, and spiritual connection to its indigenous inhabitants, who understood every bend of the river, every stand of spruce, every migration pattern of the caribou. But on that fateful day in August 1896, three men would alter the destiny of this pristine wilderness forever. George Washington Carmack, an American prospector who had married into the local Tagish community, was accompanied by his indigenous brothers-in-law, Skookum Jim Mason and Tagish Charlie. These men were not strangers to the land, they knew its moods, its seasons, its hidden places. The story begins with a conversation, as so many great adventures do. Robert Henderson, a Nova Scotia prospector, had been working claims in the area and mentioned to Carmack that he'd found promising signs of gold in the creek beds. But Henderson, reflecting the prejudices of his time, made it clear that indigenous people were not welcome to stake claims alongside white prospectors. This slight would prove to be Henderson's greatest mistake, for when Carmack and his companions made their discovery on Bonanza Creek, Henderson would be too far away to benefit from the rush that followed. Imagine Carmack kneeling by the creek on that August afternoon, the midnight sun casting long shadows through the pine trees. The water, clear and cold from mountain snow, runs over his hands as he sifts through gravel and sand. Then, glinting like captured sunlight, he sees it, a nugget of gold worth $4, more gold in one piece than most prospectors found in weeks of backbreaking work. But this is just the beginning. As Carmack and his companions explore further, they discover that Bonanza Creek is rich beyond their wildest dreams. The gold lies not deep underground, but in the creek bed itself, waiting to be gathered like fruit from a tree. They stake their claims according to Canadian mining law, Carmack taking discovery claim, with Skookum Jim and Tagish Charlie claiming the plots on either side. The trio rushes to the small trading post at Fort Emile Creek to register their claims. The recorder's office, barely more than a log cabin, becomes the first link in a chain of communication that will eventually reach around the world. But for now, news travels slowly in this frontier land. A few dozen prospectors, already working claims in the area, hear the news and quietly make their way to the Klondike River. They stake their claims and begin the arduous work of extracting gold from the frozen ground. Through the long Arctic winter of 1896 to 97, these early prospectors work in near isolation. The temperature drops to 40 below zero Fahrenheit, and the ground freezes solid as iron. Yet still they persist, building fires to thaw the earth, digging shaft after shaft, following veins of gold that seemed to run endlessly through the creek beds. One of these early miners, Clarence Berry, would later describe the surreal experience of that first winter. We worked by candlelight in shafts so narrow a man could barely turn around. Above us, the northern lights danced across the sky in colors that had no names. Below us, the gold waited, patient as the land itself. By spring 1897, the early miners have extracted an astonishing amount of gold. Rough estimates suggest that in those first months, before the Great Stampede began, fewer than 200 men had pulled over $1 million worth of gold from the Klondike creeks. To put this in perspective, a skilled laborer in 1897 might earn $500 in an entire year. Some of the Klondike claims were producing that much gold in a single week. But still, the outside world remains unaware. The Yukon territory is so remote that news of the discovery doesn't reach the major population centers until the following summer. In an age before radio or telephone service to the region, information travels only as fast as a man can walk, paddle a canoe, or sail a ship. The turning point comes in July 1897, when the steamship Excelsior docks in San Francisco, followed 3 days later by the Portland's arrival in Seattle. From these ships emerged dozens of prospectors, their pockets heavy with gold, their faces weathered by the northern sun, their eyes bright with the fever of discovery. The sight of these men, stepping off the gangplanks with suitcases and sacks full of raw gold, electrifies the waiting crowds. Newspaper reporters, always hungry for sensation, crowd around the returning miners. The headlines that follow will be seen around the world: gold, 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 gold. 68 rich men on the steamer Portland. In that moment, as the Portland's passengers display their wealth for all to see, the great Klondike Gold Rush truly begins. But these returning miners have no idea of the human avalanche they've just triggered. Across North America, in cities and towns from New York to Los Angeles, in farmhouses and factories, in banks and brothels, people are about to make the most momentous decision of their lives. The age of the individual prospector, the small-scale dreamer working alone in the wilderness, is about to give way to something unprecedented in human history, a mass migration of nearly 100,000 people, all chasing the same gleaming dream through some of the most unforgiving terrain on Earth. As this first chapter of our story closes, picture those early prospectors settling in for another night in the Yukon wilderness. The aurora borealis paints the sky in shades of green and blue, the silence is so complete it seems to have weight, and somewhere in the darkness, the Klondike River continues its eternal flow toward the sea, carrying with it flakes of gold that will soon lure thousands of dreamers into the last great wilderness of North America. The summer of 1897 brought with it a madness unlike anything the world had ever seen. In the space of just a few weeks, the Klondike Gold Rush transformed from a regional mining boom into a global phenomenon that would touch lives on every continent. Let yourself imagine the scene in Seattle on July 17, 1897. The steamship Portland has just docked at Pier 5, and word spreads through the city like wildfire: the miners aboard are carrying over a ton of gold. A ton. In an era when the average American worker earned less than $500 a year, these weathered prospectors are disembarking with fortunes that defy comprehension. The crowd grows by the hour. Clerks abandon their desks, policemen leave their beats, shopkeepers close their stores. They all press forward to catch a glimpse of the gold, to hear the stories, to touch this miracle that has emerged from the northern wilderness. One miner, interviewed by the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, casually mentions that he's been pulling $800 worth of gold from his claim every day. Another displays nuggets the size of hen's eggs. But it's not just the quantity of gold that captures the imagination, it's the stories of transformation. Here is Clarence Berry, who had been a fruit farmer in Fresno, California, now possessing $130,000 worth of gold dust and nuggets. There is William Stanley, a former YMCA physical instructor, displaying a coffee can filled with gold worth more than most men would earn in a lifetime. The Seattle Times, recognizing the magnitude of the story, publishes a special edition with the headline, Gold. 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 The newspaper sells out within hours, and by evening, the news has been telegraphed to every major city in North America. What happens next can only be described as a form of collective delirium. The late 1890s had been a time of economic depression across the United States and Canada. The Panic of 1893 had left millions unemployed, banks had failed, farms had been foreclosed, and hope seemed in short supply. But here, suddenly, was a chance to escape it all, to journey to a land where fortunes could be made by anyone willing to endure the hardship. In New York City, Wall Street brokers abandoned their positions to book passage north. In Chicago, factory workers quit en masse. In Kansas, farmers sell their land and equipment. In San Francisco, entire neighborhoods empty as residents liquidate everything they own to finance their journey to the Klondike. The transformation is not limited to men. Belinda Mulroney, an Irish-American entrepreneur, sells her ice cream business and heads north with $5,000 in capital. She will eventually become one of the wealthiest individuals in Dawson City, operating hotels, trading posts, and mining equipment businesses. Kate Rockwell, a vaudeville performer who will become known as Klondike Kate, recognizes that entertaining gold-rich miners might be more profitable than mining itself. The fever spreads internationally as well. From London, aristocrats' younger sons see an opportunity for adventure and fortune denied to them by primogeniture. From Australia, men hardened by years of gold mining in Victoria and New South Wales recognize the signs of a genuine strike. From Germany, Sweden, and Norway, emigrants who had already made one journey to the New World prepare to make another, deeper into the continent's heart. But the Klondike's remoteness means that reaching it requires careful planning and substantial resources. Unlike the California Gold Rush of 1849, where prospectors could travel overland by wagon train, or the Australian rushes where steamships could deliver miners directly to the goldfields, the Klondike poses unique challenges. There are two main routes to the goldfields, both fraught with danger. The all-water route involves taking a steamship from Seattle or San Francisco to St. Michael, Alaska, then traveling 1,700 miles up the Yukon River. This route is longer but less physically demanding. However, it's only possible during the brief summer months when the river is free of ice. The alternative is the overland route through the coast mountains of British Columbia and Alaska. This path is shorter in distance but infinitely more challenging. It requires prospectors to transport everything they need over some of the most treacherous mountain passes in North America. The Canadian government, recognizing that the Yukon Territory lacks the infrastructure to support a massive influx of people, implements what becomes known as the ton of goods rule. Every person entering Canada bound for the Klondike must bring with them a year's supply of food and equipment, roughly 2,000 pounds of supplies per person. This requirement is both practical and humanitarian. It prevents starvation in the wilderness while also ensuring that only serious, well-financed prospectors make the journey. As the news spreads throughout 1897, an entire industry springs up to serve the stampede. Seattle, recognizing its position as the logical jumping-off point, launches an aggressive marketing campaign. The mayor, W.D. Wood, travels to San Francisco and Los Angeles, promoting Seattle as the gateway to the Klondike. The city's merchants stock their shelves with everything a prospector might need: pickaxes and shovels, canvas tents and woolen blankets, sides of bacon and sacks of flour. Cooper and Levy, one of Seattle's largest outfitters, publishes detailed lists of recommended supplies. Their catalog reads like a survival manual: 400 pounds of flour, 200 pounds of bacon, 100 pounds of beans, 25 pounds of rice, 15 pounds of coffee, 5 pounds of tea, 4 pounds of salt, 1 pound of pepper, 75 pounds of dried apples, 25 pounds of prunes, 25 pounds of lima beans, plus tools, cookware, medical supplies, and cold weather clothing. The human drama playing out in outfitting stores across the Pacific Northwest is both heartbreaking and inspiring. Here is a schoolteacher from Iowa, spending his life savings of $300 on supplies, believing this represents his one chance to escape a life of genteel poverty. There is a group of college students from Yale, outfitting themselves with the most expensive gear money can buy, treating the expedition like an extended camping trip. Some of the most poignant stories involve families making desperate decisions. In one Seattle outfitting store, a reporter observes a farmer from Minnesota arguing with his wife about whether to sell their dairy cow to finance his Klondike expedition. The woman pleads with him to consider their children, while he insists that the gold will provide for their family's future better than farming ever could. The entrepreneur spirit of the age manifests in countless schemes and inventions designed to ease the journey north. Bicycle manufacturers promote specially designed ice bikes with enlarged wheels for traveling over snow. One company advertises a Klondike refrigerator, essentially an icebox designed to preserve food during the journey. Another markets a Klondike stove that supposedly burns efficiently in extreme cold. Perhaps most bizarre are the various transportation schemes proposed to reach the goldfields. One company promotes a balloon route, claiming that specially designed hot air balloons can carry prospectors and their supplies directly to Dawson City. Another proposes a reindeer express service, importing Lapland reindeer to carry supplies across the northern wilderness. A group of businessmen seriously considers constructing a monorail through the mountain passes. As 1897 progresses into winter, the first wave of stampeders begins their journey north. They travel on every available ship, many vessels hastily converted from cargo carriers to passenger service. The accommodations are often primitive. Men sleep in shifts, sharing bunks in converted cargo holds. Seasickness is endemic, supplies run short, and tensions flare as thousands of strangers are pressed together in conditions that would challenge the most patient souls. Yet the mood aboard these ships is generally optimistic, even festive. These are people who have made the most dramatic decision of their lives, burning bridges, abandoning security, betting everything on their ability to wrest fortune from the northern wilderness. They sing songs, tell stories, share dreams of the lives they'll build with Klondike gold. One passenger on the steamship Umatilla, bound for Skagway in October 1897, wrote in his diary, "The air aboard ship is electric with possibility. Men who have never met become fast friends, united by our common dream. We are all equal here. The banker from Portland sleeps next to the farm boy from Nebraska, the professor from Harvard shares his meals with the blacksmith from Detroit. We are united in our faith that the Klondike will transform our lives." As this chapter of our story closes, picture these ships cutting through the dark waters of the North Pacific, their decks crowded with dreamers, their holds packed with supplies, their destinations set for the last frontier of North America. Ahead of them lie challenges they cannot imagine, hardships that will test every fiber of their being, and for a lucky few, fortunes beyond their wildest dreams. The autumn of 1897 brought the first wave of stampeders to the shores of southeastern Alaska, and with them began one of the most epic and grueling migrations in human history. As you settle deeper into rest, let yourself journey with these determined souls as they faced the mountain passes that stood between them and their dreams. The coastal towns of Skagway and Dyea, which had been nothing more than seasonal fishing camps and trading posts, were suddenly transformed into teeming boomtowns. Imagine stepping off a steamship onto the beach at Dyea in September 1897. The scene would assault your senses, the sound of thousands of voices speaking dozens of languages, the smell of campfires and unwashed bodies, the sight of mountains of supplies stretching as far as the eye could see. Dyea sat at the foot of the Chilkoot Pass, a traditional trade route used by the Tlingit people for centuries. The indigenous Chilkoot and Chilkat clans had long controlled access to this pass, charging tolls and providing packing services to traders crossing between the coast and the interior. Now, suddenly, their ancestral highway was clogged with thousands of fortune seekers, each carrying a year's worth of supplies. The Chilkoot Pass rose 3,739 feet above sea level over a distance of just 33 miles. But these numbers fail to convey the brutal reality of the climb. The final ascent, known as the Golden Stairs, was a nearly vertical climb of 1,500 feet over less than half a mile. In winter conditions, it became a ladder of ice carved into the mountainside. Picture, if you will, a single prospector named Samuel Bennett, a former clerk from Kansas City. Like thousands of others, Bennett has spent his life savings on supplies and passage north. He stands on the beach at Dyea with his ton of goods spread around him. Bags of flour and beans, strips of bacon wrapped in canvas, mining tools, cooking equipment, canvas for shelter, and warm clothing. The Canadian government's requirement that each person bring a year's worth of supplies creates a logistical nightmare. No single person can carry 2,000 pounds of equipment over a mountain pass in one trip. The solution becomes a grinding test of endurance, multiple trips, carrying what a man can bear on his back, then returning for another load. Most stampeders can carry between 50 and 75 pounds at a time, depending on their physical condition and the difficulty of the terrain. This means that reaching the summit of Chilkoot Pass with all their supplies requires between 20 and 30 separate trips. The round trip from Dyea to the summit takes most men an entire day. This means that for the average prospector, simply getting his supplies over the pass requires nearly a month of backbreaking labor. The human cost of this endeavor becomes apparent almost immediately. Men who have lived sedentary lives as clerks, teachers, and shopkeepers find themselves attempting feats of endurance that would challenge professional athletes. Heart attacks are common on the steep sections of the trail. Injuries from falls, hypothermia from exposure, and exhaustion-induced collapses create a steady stream of casualties. Yet the remarkable thing is not how many fail, but how many persist. Day after day, week after week, this river of humanity flows up and down the mountain. They develop techniques for survival, systems for mutual aid, and a peculiar form of trail etiquette that governs behavior in extreme conditions. The weather adds another layer of challenge. Southeast Alaska in autumn and winter is a realm of perpetual storms. Rain turns the lower elevations into muddy quagmires that can swallow a man to his waist. Snow and ice make the higher elevations treacherous beyond description. Temperatures can drop to 20 below zero, with winds that cut through clothing like knives. One of the most haunting images of the gold rush comes from photographer Eric Haig, who captured the endless line of climbers ascending the golden stairs in single file. The photograph shows hundreds of tiny figures, black against the white snow, stretched like ants across the mountainside. Each figure represents a human being carrying everything he owns on his back, driven forward by dreams of wealth and fear of failure. The indigenous packers, particularly the Tlingit people, played a crucial role in this migration. They possessed knowledge of the terrain that no outsider could match, and physical conditioning developed over generations of mountain travel. Many stampeders hired Tlingit packers to help transport their supplies, paying rates that reflected both the difficulty of the work and the packers' specialized skills. These business relationships, however, were often fraught with cultural misunderstanding and racial prejudice. Many white prospectors held stereotypical views of indigenous peoples, while simultaneously depending on their expertise for survival. The Tlingit packers, for their part, were witnessing the largest invasion of their traditional territory in history, with thousands of strangers trampling ancient trails and disturbing sacred sites. Some of the most remarkable stories from the passes involve women who made the journey north. Mrs. Eli Gage, traveling with her husband, carried her share of supplies over Chilkoot Pass while pregnant. She gave birth to a daughter, whom they named Klondike Gage, in a tent on the shores of Lake Bennett. Another woman, known to history only as Mrs. Adams, made the journey with 3 young children, the youngest just 2 years old. The alternative route through White Pass, accessible from Skagway, offered different challenges. This pass was longer but less steep than Chilkoot, making it suitable for pack animals. However, the trail conditions were so brutal that White Pass earned the grim nickname Dead Horse Trail. An estimated 3,000 horses died on this route during the winter of 1897–98, their bodies creating a grotesque pathway of death that marked the trail for years afterward. The town of Skagway, gateway to White Pass, was controlled by one of the most notorious figures of the Gold Rush era, Jefferson Randolph "Soapy" Smith. Smith was a con man and criminal who had operated in Denver and other western towns before recognizing the opportunities presented by the Klondike Stampede. He and his gang systematically robbed and cheated prospectors, operating fake telegraph offices, rigged gambling halls, and protection rackets. Soapy Smith's reign of terror in Skagway illustrates the lawless nature of the early gold rush. The town existed in a legal gray area, too new for established civil authority, too remote for effective law enforcement. Smith's gang filled this vacuum with their own brutal form of order, extracting tribute from nearly everyone who passed through. The situation in Skagway reached a crisis point in July 1898, when Smith's men robbed a prospector of a substantial gold poke. A citizens' committee formed to confront Smith, leading to a gun battle on the Skagway docks. Both Smith and Frank Reed, the leader of the vigilante committee, died in the shootout. Reed's tombstone reads, "He gave his life for the honor of Skagway." For those who survived the passes, the next challenge was building boats to carry them down the Yukon River system to Dawson City. Lake Bennett, at the headwaters of the Yukon, became a massive shipbuilding operation during the winter of 1897–98. Thousands of men, most with no experience in boat construction, attempted to build seaworthy vessels from green lumber. The forest around Lake Bennett was systematically stripped of trees as stampeders cut lumber for their boats. The shores of the lake became a sprawling tent city of 20,000 people, all waiting for the ice to break up so they could begin the final leg of their journey. Makeshift sawmills operated around the clock, restaurants served meals from canvas kitchens, and entrepreneurs sold everything from nails to nautical advice. The quality of boat construction varied enormously. Some stampeders, particularly those with carpentry experience, built sturdy craft capable of handling the rapids and rough water ahead. Others cobbled together barely floating contraptions that would barely survive launching. One observer described the fleet gathering on Lake Bennett as everything from arks to coffins. When the ice finally broke up in late May 1898, the exodus began. In the space of a few days, over 7,000 boats of every description set sail down the lake and into the Yukon River system. It was the largest flotilla in North American history, armada of dreamers heading into the wilderness. The journey down the Yukon presented its own dangers. The river system included several sets of serious rapids, most notably Miles Canyon and the Whitehorse Rapids. These churning waters claimed dozens of boats and lives. Eventually, the Northwest Mounted Police established regulations requiring certain safety measures and piloting services through the most dangerous sections. One of the most detailed accounts of this river journey comes from the diary of Martha Louise Black, one of the few women to make the complete journey to Dawson City. She wrote, "The river carries us along like chips on a torrent. Around every bend lies the unknown. We have committed ourselves completely to this waterway, trusting our lives and our fortunes to a current that cares nothing for our dreams. As our stampeders float through the wilderness toward Dawson City, imagine the profound transformation they have already undergone. Men and women who began this journey as clerks, farmers, and shopkeepers have become something harder, more resilient. They have learned to carry crushing loads over mountain passes, to build shelters in howling storms, to construct boats with primitive tools, and to navigate dangerous waters. Yet the greatest challenges still lie ahead. They are floating toward a destination that exists in their imaginations as a place of unlimited opportunity, but the reality of Dawson City and the Klondike goldfields will test them in ways they cannot yet imagine. The physical challenges of the trail, severe as they have been, pale in comparison to the psychological and social challenges that await them at journey's end. As this chapter closes, picture that great flotilla spread across miles of river, each boat carrying its cargo of hopes and supplies toward the midnight sun of the Yukon summer, while behind them, the mountain passes they have conquered stand silent under the northern lights, already preparing for the next wave of dreamers who will follow in their wake. In the summer of 1898, at the confluence of the Yukon and Klondike rivers, stood one of the most remarkable cities in human history. Dawson City had erupted from the wilderness in less than 2 years, growing from a handful of log cabins to a metropolis of 40,000 souls. As you drift deeper into sleep, let yourself walk the muddy streets of this legendary boomtown at the height of its glory. Picture arriving in Dawson City aboard one of those ramshackle boats that survived the journey down the Yukon. As you round the final bend in the river, the city spreads before you like a mirage. Where maps had shown only wilderness just 3 years earlier, you now see a dense grid of streets lined with log buildings, canvas tents, and even a few impressive structures that wouldn't look out of place in San Francisco or Chicago. The first thing that strikes you about Dawson City is the sheer improbability of its existence. Here, just 200 miles south of the Arctic Circle, in a region where winter temperatures regularly drop to 50 below zero, someone has managed to create all the amenities of urban civilization. There are hotels with imported crystal chandeliers, restaurants serving fresh oysters shipped from the Pacific coast, and theaters presenting Shakespeare and vaudeville to audiences dressed in evening wear. Yet the city also bears the unmistakable marks of frontier life. The streets are unpaved rivers of mud during the brief summer months, and frozen ruts during the long winter. Most buildings are hastily constructed log structures, chinked with moss and heated by wood-burning stoves that must operate continuously for 8 months of the year. The city has no sewage system, no electric power grid, and no telephone service connecting it to the outside world. The population of Dawson City in 1898 reads like a catalogue of human diversity. There are prospectors from every American state and Canadian province, immigrants from dozens of countries, indigenous people from across the Yukon and Alaska, and entrepreneurs who have followed the gold seekers north to separate them from their wealth through commerce rather than mining. One of the most fascinating aspects of Dawson City is how quickly it develops sophisticated social institutions. Within months of the first major influx of stampeders, the city boasted several newspapers, numerous churches, a hospital, schools, and even a library. The Yukon Sun and the Klondike Nugget competed to provide news and commentary, while the Arctic Brotherhood and other fraternal organizations provided social structure and mutual aid. The economic life of Dawson City was both primitive and incredibly sophisticated. Gold dust served as the primary medium of exchange, weighed out on scales in every business establishment. A pinch of dust might buy a drink, while a pouch could purchase supplies for a month. Yet the city also supported complex credit arrangements, international banking, and investment schemes that connected Yukon gold to capital markets in London, New York, and San Francisco. Belinda Mulrooney exemplifies the entrepreneurial spirit that flourished in Dawson City. Starting with a modest investment, she built a business empire that included the Grand Forks Hotel, the Fairview Hotel in Dawson, and investments in numerous mining claims. Her Fairview Hotel featured electric lighting, powered by a private generator, hot and cold running water, and elegant furnishings that attracted the wealthiest miners in the territory. The entertainment district along Front Street became legendary throughout North America. The Monte Carlo, the Aurora Saloon, and dozens of other establishments offered gambling, drinking, and dancing 24 hours a day during the summer months. These weren't the rough saloons of popular imagination, but sophisticated entertainment palaces that employed professional dealers, skilled bartenders, and talented performers. Among the most famous entertainers was Kate Rockwell, known as Klondike Kate. A vaudeville performer from the American Midwest, Kate recognized that entertaining gold-rich miners could be far more profitable than mining itself. Her flamboyant stage persona and shrewd business sense made her one of the wealthiest and most famous residents of Dawson City. The social dynamics of Dawson City were unique in North American frontier history. The presence of the Northwest Mounted Police provided a level of law and order unusual in mining camps. The Canadian government's firm control over the territory meant that the vigilante justice common in American mining towns was largely unnecessary. While crimes certainly existed, the overall level of violence was remarkably low for a frontier community of its size. Women in Dawson City enjoyed opportunities and freedoms unusual for the 1890s. The shortage of traditional service industries meant that women could earn substantial incomes as restaurateurs, seamstresses, hotel operators, and entertainers. The ratio of men to women, roughly 10-1, meant that women possessed considerable social and economic leverage. Many accumulated significant wealth and achieved levels of independence impossible in more conventional communities. The indigenous peoples of the region found their lives dramatically altered by the gold rush. The Tirondek-Wechin, who had lived in the area for thousands of years, suddenly found their traditional territory overrun by tens of thousands of strangers. Their seasonal fishing camps and hunting grounds were displaced by the growing city. Yet some adapted to the new circumstances, working as guides, packers, and suppliers of fish and game to the urban population. Chief Isaac, leader of the Tirondek-Wechin, navigated these changes with remarkable diplomacy. He established trading relationships with the newcomers while working to protect his people's interests. The indigenous knowledge of local conditions, wildlife patterns, and survival techniques proved invaluable to many stampeders who had arrived unprepared for Arctic conditions. The international character of Dawson City created a unique cultural atmosphere. On a single street, you might hear English, French, German, Swedish, Russian, Chinese, and Japanese. The Chinese community, in particular, established successful businesses serving both Chinese and non-Chinese customers. Their restaurants, laundries, and general stores became integral parts of the city's economy. Religious life in Dawson City reflected both the diversity of the population and the human need for spiritual comfort in challenging circumstances. St. Paul's Anglican Church, St. Mary's Catholic Church, and several Protestant denominations all established congregations. These churches served not only religious functions but also provided social services, education, and cultural activities. Perhaps most remarkably, Dawson City became a center of learning and culture despite its remote location. The Arctic Brotherhood organized lectures, debates, and literary discussions. The library, established through community donations, acquired thousands of books and periodicals. During the long winter months, when outdoor work was impossible, many residents devoted themselves to reading, writing, and intellectual pursuits. The city's isolation created a unique news cycle. During the winter months, Dawson City was completely cut off from the outside world. No mail arrived, no newspapers were delivered, and no telegraph messages penetrated the northern wilderness. Residents would spend months speculating about events in the outside, as they called the rest of the world, until the first steamboat of spring brought newspapers, letters, and updates on world events. This isolation led to the development of a distinct local culture. Dawson City developed its own slang, its own social customs, and its own ways of coping with the extreme conditions. The phrase, chichaco, meaning newcomer or tenderfoot, became part of the local vocabulary, while someone who had survived a full winter was known as a sourdough, after the fermented dough starter that never froze and provided the basis for bread throughout the winter. The economic engine that powered all of this urban development was, of course, the gold itself. The productive claims along Eldorado Creek, Bonanza Creek, and other tributaries of the Klondike River were generating wealth at a rate unprecedented in mining history. Some claims were producing $1,000 worth of gold per day, while the average industrial worker in the United States earned less than $500 per year. Yet for every miner who struck it rich, dozens found little or nothing. The mathematics of the gold rush were brutal. Perhaps 5% of prospectors found enough gold to cover their expenses and make a profit. Another 15% broke even or lost small amounts. The remaining 80% lost everything, their savings, their health, and sometimes their lives. This harsh reality created a complex social dynamic in Dawson City. The successful miners, known as Klondike Kings, lived in unprecedented luxury, buying champagne by the case and gambling with pouches full of gold dust. Meanwhile, less fortunate prospectors worked as laborers, waited tables, or sought any employment that might finance another attempt at finding gold. The stories of individual fortunes made and lost in Dawson City have become legendary. Big Alex McDonald, known as the King of the Klondike, controlled claims worth millions of dollars but lived simply and reinvested constantly in new mining ventures. Anton Stander, an Austrian immigrant, struck it rich on Claim 13 Eldorado, then lost his fortune gambling and drinking, only to strike it rich again on another claim. One of the most poignant figures was William Sloane, a quiet man from Nova Scotia who had saved for years to finance his trip to the Klondike. He spent 2 seasons working claims that produced barely enough gold to pay for food and supplies. When he finally admitted defeat and prepared to return home, he sold his final claim for $500 to pay for passage. The buyer extracted $50,000 worth of gold from that same claim within 6 months. As winter approached each year, Dawson City transformed into something resembling a medieval fortress under siege. The river froze solid, cutting the city off from the outside world until the following spring. Supplies had to last 8 months, and prices reflected this reality. Fresh eggs cost $1 each, fresh milk was $5 per quart, and fresh fruit was so rare that oranges sold for $5 apiece, more than a week's wages for a laborer in the outside world. The winter social season in Dawson City was unlike anything else in North America. With outdoor work largely impossible and the city sealed off from the world, residents created an intense, inward-focused community life. The theaters operated continuously, presenting everything from Shakespeare to popular melodramas. Masquerade balls, literary societies, and amateur theatrical productions provided entertainment and social connection during the months of perpetual darkness. One of the most remarkable aspects of Dawson City's winter life was how it democratized wealth and social status. In the closed environment of winter, a man's worth was measured less by his bank account than by his ability to contribute to the community's well-being. A failed prospector who could tell good stories, play musical instruments, or organize entertainment was often more valued than a wealthy miner who contributed nothing to the social fabric. The city developed its own economy of mutual aid and informal credit that sustained residents through the difficult months. Neighbors shared firewood, food, and medical care without formal accounting. The understanding was that survival depended on cooperation, and debts incurred during winter hardship would be settled when spring brought renewed opportunity. Yet beneath the surface camaraderie, winter also brought psychological challenges that many residents were unprepared for. The combination of darkness, isolation, extreme cold, and the gradual depletion of supplies created what doctors of the era called cabin fever, a form of depression and anxiety that could manifest in violence, paranoia, or complete withdrawal from social contact. The city's physicians, notably Dr. Alfred Thompson and Dr. Joseph Cato, documented cases of mental breakdown, suicide, and what they termed Arctic hysteria. The long nights and social pressure created a greenhouse effect for human emotions, intensifying both friendships and feuds beyond anything experienced in more temperate climates. As this chapter of our story draws to a close, picture Dawson City on a clear winter night in January 1899. The temperature stands at 40 below zero, and the aurora borealis dances across the star-filled sky in curtains of green and blue light. The city lies beneath a blanket of pristine snow, smoke rising from hundreds of chimneys like prayers into the crystalline air. In the Monte Carlo, miners still flush with gold warm themselves with whiskey and stories. At the Fairview Hotel, Belinda Mulrooney reviews her account books by lamplight, calculating profits from her various enterprises. In a dozen churches, evening services provide spiritual comfort to those far from home and family. And in hundreds of small cabins, men and women from around the world have created a temporary but genuine community at the edge of the world. As the excitement and romance of the gold rush began to settle into the hard realities of northern mining, the true nature of the Klondike's promise became clear. Like so many dreams of instant wealth, the golden dream of the far north proved to be both more and less than its seekers had imagined. Let yourself drift into the quieter, more contemplative phase of this great adventure, where individual stories of triumph and tragedy illuminate the complex arithmetic of fortune. By the summer of 1899, most of the easily accessible gold had been claimed. The creek beds that had yielded nuggets to early prospectors now required industrial-scale operations to extract remaining wealth. What had begun as a rush of individual dreamers was evolving into a corporate mining industry that bore little resemblance to the romantic prospecting of the early days. The transformation was most visible along El Dorado and Bonanza Creeks, where small individual claims were being consolidated into larger operations. Steam-powered equipment replaced picks and shovels. Hydraulic mining, which used high-pressure water jets to blast gold-bearing gravel from hillsides, began to reshape the landscape itself. The environmental cost of this industrialization was enormous. Entire valleys were stripped of vegetation and topsoil in the pursuit of gold. For the vast majority of stampeders who had endured the hardships of the trail, this industrialization meant the end of their prospecting dreams. A man working alone with hand tools simply could not compete with mechanical operations capable of processing tons of gravel per day. The window of opportunity for the individual prospector had closed almost as quickly as it had opened. Yet the human stories that emerged from this transition reveal something profound about resilience and adaptation. Consider the case of Tom Lippy, a Seattle YMCA administrator who had abandoned his comfortable position to seek Klondike gold. Lippy's initial claims proved disappointing, yielding barely enough gold to cover expenses. Rather than return home in defeat, he used his organizational skills to establish a successful freight business, eventually earning more from transportation than he ever could have from mining. Similarly, Fred Trumper, a failed prospector from Ohio, discovered that his real talent lay in supplying the needs of other miners. He established a trading post that provided everything from mining equipment to personal luxuries, creating a steady income that proved far more reliable than the uncertain rewards of prospecting. His success illustrates how the gold rush created opportunities that extended far beyond mining itself. The stories of women in the Klondike reveal particularly innovative approaches to opportunity. Martha Black, who had endured the rigors of the Chilkoot Pass, eventually became a successful businesswoman and later a member of the Canadian Parliament. Her memoir captures the transformation many experienced. We came seeking gold in the ground, but found instead that we had discovered capabilities in ourselves we never knew existed. Ethel Berry, wife of successful miner Clarence Berry, established what may have been the first beauty salon in Dawson City. Recognizing that even in the wilderness, women valued personal grooming and social gathering spaces, she created a business that served both practical and social needs. Her success demonstrates how traditional gender roles were often suspended or transformed by frontier conditions. The Chinese community in Dawson City provides another example of adaptive entrepreneurship. Many Chinese immigrants had been excluded from mining claims by discriminatory policies, but they established essential service businesses that proved highly profitable. Chinese restaurants, laundries, and general stores became integral parts of Dawson's economy. Some, like Charlie Singh, accumulated substantial wealth through careful saving and real estate investment. As the easy gold disappeared, many stampeders faced a difficult choice. Accept that their dreams of wealth were unlikely to materialize, or persist in increasingly desperate circumstances. The psychological cost of this realization was enormous. Men who had sacrificed everything for their Klondike adventure found themselves confronting the possibility that their gamble had failed. The winter of 1899 to 1900 saw a significant exodus from Dawson City as disillusioned prospectors acknowledged defeat and began the long journey home. Yet leaving required resources many no longer possessed. Passage on the first steamboat of spring cost $150, more than many unsuccessful miners had managed to save. Some worked as laborers through the winter to earn passage money, while others became permanent residents of the North by necessity rather than choice. Those who stayed often underwent profound personal transformation. Cut off from their former lives and identities, they had to reconstruct themselves in the context of Northern society. Many found that the person they had become in the Klondike bore little resemblance to the person who had left home 2 or 3 years earlier. The letters and diaries from this period reveal a complex mixture of disappointment and discovery. James Henderson, a farmer from Kansas who never found significant gold, wrote to his wife, "I came north seeking fortune and found instead that I am capable of enduring hardships I never imagined possible. Perhaps that knowledge is worth more than gold, though it buys fewer groceries." The successful miners, the famous Klondike kings, faced their own challenges. Sudden wealth often proved as difficult to manage as poverty had been to endure. Big Alex McDonald, despite controlling claims worth millions, died relatively poor, having reinvested his wealth in increasingly speculative ventures. His story illustrates how the psychology of boom-and-bust cycles could trap even successful players. Anton Stander's experience was perhaps more typical of the fortunate few. After striking it rich on Eldorado Creek, he returned to Austria with enough wealth to live comfortably for the rest of his life. Yet his memoir reveals that he never fully readjusted to conventional society, spending his remaining years longing for the intensity and possibility he had experienced in the Klondike. The indigenous peoples of the region faced their own profound changes as the gold rush transformed their traditional territory. Some adapted successfully to the new economic opportunities, working as guides, packers, and suppliers of traditional foods. Others found their traditional way of life disrupted beyond recognition as game animals were depleted, waterways polluted by mining, and sacred sites disturbed by industrial activity. Chief Isaac of the Adirondack Wet'suwet'en emerged as a sophisticated negotiator, working to protect his people's interests while engaging constructively with the newcomers. His ability to bridge two worlds, traditional indigenous life and the cash economy of the gold rush, provided a model for cultural adaptation that influenced government policy throughout the Canadian North. The environmental legacy of the Klondike Gold Rush became apparent even during the boom years. The combination of hydraulic mining, deforestation, and urban development in a fragile Arctic ecosystem created lasting damage. Creeks that had run clear for millennia became clogged with mining sediment. Permafrost, disturbed by mining operations, created unstable ground conditions that persist to this day. Yet the rush also generated scientific knowledge about the North that proved invaluable for future development. Government surveyors mapped vast areas of previously unknown territory. Geologists gained understanding of mineral deposits, soil conditions, and geological formations. Botanists and biologists documented plant and animal species new to science. The social experiment of Dawson City also provided insights into human behavior under extreme conditions. The city demonstrated that sophisticated urban civilization could be established even in the most challenging environments, given sufficient motivation and resources. It also showed how traditional social hierarchies could be suspended or transformed when survival demanded cooperation across class and ethnic lines. As 1900 dawned, the character of the Klondike Gold Rush was changing fundamentally. The era of the individual prospector was ending, replaced by corporate mining operations with substantial capital backing. The romance of the stampede was giving way to the mundane realities of industrial extraction. Yet for those who had participated in the great adventure, the experience remained transformative. Dr. Leonard Sugden, a physician who had abandoned his practice in Toronto to seek Klondike gold, perhaps captured the ultimate meaning of the experience best. Writing years later, he observed, "We thought we were seeking gold, but we were really seeking ourselves." The North stripped away everything artificial, everything borrowed, everything we thought we needed to be. What remained was what we actually were, and for many of us, that was both less and more than we had imagined. As this chapter closes, imagine looking back across the transformed landscape of the Klondike in the autumn of 1900. The creeks run thick with mining sediment, the hillsides bear scars from hydraulic operations, and Dawson City has settled into the rhythms of a permanent community rather than a temporary camp. The Great Stampede is ending, but its effects will ripple through Canadian history, American culture, and the lives of those who answered the call of Northern Gold. The dreams that brought nearly 100,000 people north have been tested against the harsh realities of mining, climate, and human nature. Most of those dreams have been disappointed, but not destroyed. They have been transformed into something more practical, more nuanced, and perhaps more valuable than the simple desire for wealth that originally motivated the journey. As our journey through the Klondike Gold Rush draws to its close, let yourself drift into the long twilight of this extraordinary chapter in human history. The stampede that began with such explosive energy would fade gradually, like the northern lights that danced over the Yukon territory, leaving behind traces of beauty and wonder that would endure long after the immediate spectacle had passed. By 1901, the Great Rush was effectively over. The easily accessible placer gold had been exhausted, and what remained required industrial equipment and significant capital investment to extract profitably. Dawson City's population had fallen from its peak of 40,000 to fewer than 8,000 residents. The stampeders were dispersing across North America and beyond, carrying with them stories that would shape the mythology of the continent for generations. Yet the end of the gold rush was not the end of the North. The infrastructure created to support the stampede, the shipping routes, the mountain passes, the river navigation systems, remained to serve future development. The Canadian government had established permanent administrative presence in the Yukon territory, laying the foundation for modern northern governance. The knowledge gained about Arctic conditions, mining techniques, and frontier society would prove invaluable for subsequent northern development. Many of those who had come north for gold remained to build permanent lives in the territory. They became farmers in the Yukon River Valley, established businesses in Dawson City and other communities, and created the foundation of a stable northern society. Their children would grow up as northerners, inheriting a unique cultural identity shaped by the extraordinary circumstances of their parents' generation. The Klondike Gold Rush also left a lasting impact on Canadian national identity. The successful administration of the stampede by the Northwest Mounted Police and Canadian civil authorities demonstrated the young nation's capacity to manage large-scale challenges in remote territories. The peaceful, orderly nature of the Canadian Klondike, contrasted with the often violent mining camps of the American West, became a source of national pride that influenced Canadian self-perception for decades. In the broader context of North American development, the Klondike Gold Rush represented the last great frontier adventure of the 19th century. It came at the end of an era when individual initiative and physical courage could still create extraordinary opportunities. The 20th century would be dominated by corporate enterprise and industrial organization, but the Klondike offered one final moment when ordinary people could imagine transforming their lives through their own efforts in wild, unclaimed territory. The cultural legacy of the Gold Rush proved even more enduring than its economic impact. The stories of the stampede entered popular culture through books, films, and songs that romanticized the adventure while often overlooking its harsh realities. Writers like Jack London, who had spent time in the Klondike, created literary works that captured the drama and beauty of the northern experience for audiences who would never venture beyond temperate climates. The phrase, "the call of the wild," entered the English language largely through London's depiction of the North, expressing a universal human longing for adventure, authenticity, and connection with untamed nature. This romantic interpretation of the Klondike experience would influence how subsequent generations viewed both the Canadian North and the relationship between civilization and wilderness. For the indigenous peoples of the region, the Gold Rush marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. The massive disruption of traditional life patterns was followed by gradual adaptation to a world where traditional and modern ways of life coexisted in complex relationships. The knowledge and skills that had enabled survival in the North for thousands of years proved valuable in the new economy, creating opportunities for those able to bridge both worlds. As the last light fades on our story, consider the individual human beings who participated in this great adventure. They came from ordinary circumstances, farms and cities, offices and factories, seeking something extraordinary. Most found hardship rather than wealth, endurance rather than ease, community rather than individual triumph. Yet in their collective experience, they demonstrated something profound about human nature, our capacity to dream beyond our circumstances, to endure hardships for uncertain rewards, and to create community and meaning even in the most challenging conditions. The gold they sought was ultimately less important than the human qualities they discovered in themselves and each other. The northern lights still dance over the Yukon territory, as they did during those extraordinary years when the world's attention focused on a remote corner of the continent. The Klondike River still flows past Dawson City, carrying traces of gold toward the Yukon River and eventually to the Bering Sea. The mountain passes that tested the stampeders still challenge those who venture into the wilderness seeking their own forms of treasure. And somewhere in the vast silence of the northern forest, the spirits of those who answered the call of Klondike Gold seem to whisper still, not of wealth or failure, but of the enduring human capacity to dream greatly, to venture boldly, and to discover in the pursuit of gold something far more precious, the true measure of what we are capable of becoming when circumstances demand our very best. Sleep now, and let your dreams carry you along those ancient trails, across those pristine waters, under those endless northern skies, to a place where ordinary people once did extraordinary things, and where the echo of their courage still resonates in the wind.